Do you believe that electric cars are a new invention? Most people think so. After all, it was only in recent years that we started to see Teslas on the streets, batteries being discussed in the news, and governments proposing the end of combustion cars. But what if I told you that all this was already possible more than 100 years ago? And worse, that electric vehicles could have been cheap and accessible from the beginning if they hadn't been intentionally forgotten? This is not a conspiracy theory. It's a historical fact, studiously ignored. The history of electric mobility does not begin with Elon Musk. It begins in the 19th century, and it starts in a promising way. So promising that it ended up becoming too dangerous for the system. Imagine the streets of New York in the year 1900. There were no traffic lights. Horses still dominated the city. But there, among the carriages, something new appeared. Electric cars. Silent, smokeless, without the smell of gasoline, noiseless. No gear, no engine noise. They didn't need a clutch. They did not require physical strength to turn on. They were, in every sense, more advanced than the combustion cars of the time. While gasoline-powered cars were noisy, dangerous, and required manual effort to operate, electric cars already offered a smooth, clean, and futuristic experience. Now take a deep breath and hold this information. In 1900, nearly 40% of vehicles in the United States were electric. Yes, 40%. So the obvious question is, why did they disappear? Why did such a promising technology, so ahead of its time, just disappear? That's where this story starts to get dark. Why electric vehicles did not fail due to technical failure. They didn't disappear for lack of demand. They were erased. And above all, they were never cheap, because they didn't let them be. The idea of an affordable electric car threatened gigantic interests. Oil companies, automotive industry, governments. A vehicle that didn't need gasoline, had less maintenance, and lasted much longer. It was the nightmare of those who profit from the eternal cycle of consumption. You may even find it exaggerated. But it is no coincidence that, from the beginning, trams were considered luxury items. It is no coincidence that, since 1910, no one has seriously invested in making them popular. And when someone tried, well, you'll see what happened. Because this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is the story of how the future was sabotaged before it even began. And throughout this video, you will discover that electric cars, they were never really expensive. They were kept that way, on purpose. At the end of the 19th century, the world was experiencing silent euphoria. Cities were beginning to light up with electricity. The streets, previously dominated by horses, were about to receive a new type of transportation, and no one knew for sure which technology would win. Internal combustion was still in its infancy. It was noisy, dangerous, unstable. But an alternative was gaining ground almost discreetly: electric vehicles. In 1832, in Scotland, Robert Anderson developed what can be considered the first sketch of an electric car, a primitive prototype with non-rechargeable batteries. It was an idea ahead of its time, but still without practical application. Decades later, North American and European engineers began to transform that idea into something viable. In the late 1880s, William Morrison in the United States presented a functional electric model with passenger capacity and real operation in urban areas. It was the birth of a revolution, silently, literally, and symbolically. And she didn't stop there. In the early years of the 20th century, electric vehicles have reached their peak. In 1900, it is estimated that around 38% of cars in the United States were electric. Another 40% were still horse-drawn, and only about 22% were gasoline-powered. EVs at the time were considered advanced. They had automatic start, didn't exhale smoke, didn't make noise. They were ideal for the city, especially among elite women, who preferred to drive a vehicle that did not require physical strength or manipulation of oil or gears. Meanwhile, gasoline cars required heavy cranks, exploded easily, and spread a strong smell wherever they went. So, the question is inevitable. What went wrong? Why have electric vehicles, clearly superior in many aspects, disappeared? The answer begins in 1908 with the launch of the Ford Modelo T. Henry Ford, an industrial visionary, created something that would change the world: the assembly line. With it, the Model T became the first mass-produced car. Its cost dropped dramatically, from more than $1,000 to about $300 a few years later. It was the people's car, and it was powered by gasoline. But Ford was not an advocate of combustion. Quite the opposite. What few people know is that in 1914, he teamed up with his friend Thomas Edison to create an ambitious project: an affordable, durable electric car built to last for decades. Edison was already working with an innovative nickel-iron battery. Unlike conventional batteries, its technology was more resistant, tolerated overloads, and lasted much longer. The plan was clear: to put a silent, clean, and, most importantly, cheap vehicle on the streets. The project was announced in newspapers at the time. The press talked about the revolution that was coming. The car would be launched soon. But the launch never happened. The project mysteriously disappeared. There was no bankruptcy. There was no recall. There was no statement. Simply, it disappeared. What happened? The answer may be in the figure of John D. Rockefeller, founder of Standard Oil and one of the most powerful men of his time. Rockefeller controlled more than 90% of U.S. oil refining. The more gasoline cars on the road, the more money he made. What's more, gasoline created dependence. An electric car, with few moving parts and minimal maintenance, could last decades. But a combustion car required oil, candles, filters, exhaust, radiator. With every repair, profit. With every full tank, more power. The electric vehicle did not just represent a technological threat. He threatened the business model of an entire industry that was being born. An industry that needed fuel, maintenance, and planned obsolescence. And so, one by one, electrical projects were abandoned, shelved, or ridiculed. The story they told us was different: that EVs were too expensive, too weak, too unfeasible. But was it really? Decades passed. The world plunged into oil, from industry to war, from economics to international politics. The combustion car has become a symbol of progress. Meanwhile, trams have become museum curiosities, period pieces, forgotten relics from a timeline that never happened. Until, in 1996, something unexpected happened. General Motors launched the EV1, a 100% electric car, modern, efficient. Initially offered only by lease, it won over California drivers with its performance, quietness, and economy. People loved the EV1. They asked to buy it. They wanted it to be produced on a large scale. But GM refused. And in 2002, he announced the end of the program. All cars were collected against the will of users. Some tried to hide their vehicles. Others protested. But it was useless. GM destroyed all the EV1s one by one. The videos are still available. Excavators crushing the future in front of prohibited cameras. The official justification? Lack of market interest. A real, you already know. The past shows a pattern. Every time the electric car threatens to become popular, affordable, viable, he is silenced. Not for failing, but because it works too well. For more than a century, we were taught that electric vehicles were an interesting but premature idea. That didn't work properly, which were too expensive, fragile, slow, impractical. This story was repeated so many times that it began to seem true. But it wasn't. Electric vehicles did not fail due to technical deficiencies. They were interrupted, deleted, and every time something promising is cut short, the question needs to be asked: who benefited? To find that answer, we need to look beyond cars. We need to look at who made money from the failure of the trams, And when we follow the money trail, the story changes. At the beginning of the 20th century, electrical energy was one of the main candidates to dominate urban mobility. Electric cars already existed. In some American cities, almost half the fleet was electric. Silent, clean, elegant, and easy to drive, these vehicles were preferred by people with high purchasing power, and especially by women, who did not have to deal with the dangers and discomforts of the combustion engine. And even with the technological limitations of the time, EVs delivered exactly what they promised: efficient urban mobility. But while electric cars were gaining momentum, another empire was growing behind the scenes: oil. And that empire had a name: John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller had founded Standard Oil and, within a short time, controlled more than 90% of oil refining in the United States. Fossil fuel was the basis of his business. If electric vehicles gained ground, their entire empire would be at risk. He needed gas cars to win, and he made sure that happened. Through political lobbying, influence over governments, and control of infrastructure, oil began to become the most viable solution. Gasoline began to be sold everywhere. Meanwhile, the electrical grid was decentralized, expensive, and poorly distributed. And no one invested in making it adapt to cars. The sabotage was not noisy. It didn't happen through direct bans. The sabotage was silent, strategic, and effective. It happened in decisions that were never made, in technologies that were never financed, in projects that were shelved before being born. A striking example was the joint project between Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. In 1914, the two were developing a low-cost electric car aimed at mass production. Edison, with his research into nickel-iron batteries, believed he had found a durable and practical solution. Ford had already revolutionized the market with series production. The promise was an affordable electric car for millions of people. But the project disappeared. No model reached the streets. No production lines were built. No convincing explanation was given. The reason: the pressure behind the scenes. Auto parts manufacturers, refineries, fuel distributors, they all depended on maintenance, on replenishment, on constantly burning gasoline. An affordable, low-maintenance, long-life electric car was a direct threat to the dominant business model. And it didn't stop there. As the automobile industry grew, the complexity of combustion vehicles became an advantage for those looking to make a profit. More parts meant more breakages, more maintenance, more workshops, more profit. An electric car, with a simple engine and few moving parts, destroyed this logic. This system was supported by a power structure: the lobby. Large automakers started financing political campaigns. They influenced laws, blocked incentives for electrification, and created barriers to the adoption of new technologies. And this didn't just happen in the United States. Around the world, the expansion of fossil fuels was treated as a state priority. At the same time, the public narrative was shaped. Magazines, newspapers, and commercials reinforced that electric vehicles were weak, slow, and unsafe. When someone tried something new, the media response was predictable. It's not practical, it's not profitable, it's not the future. Information control was part of the sabotage. Decades later, this pattern was repeated in an even more explicit way. In 1996, General Motors launched the EV1, a modern, silent, agile electric car. It was offered on lease in California. The drivers loved it. It was cheap to maintain, performed well, and met everyday needs. But GM didn't put it up for sale. And in 2002, he announced the end of the program. All EV1 were collected, even with protests, even with waiting lists of interested parties. And they were destroyed. The official justification was lack of demand. But internal documents and interviews reveal another story. The EV1 represented everything traditional industries feared. It was trustworthy. It did not generate profit from maintenance. It did not require gasoline. It didn't break often. He threatened an entire system. Today, the main beneficiaries of the historic failure of electric vehicles remain the same. Oil companies remain among the most profitable on the planet. The automotive parts industry turns over billions a year. Machine shops, supply chains, heat engine manufacturers, they all rely on a model of constant wear and tear. And now, in modern times, a new element has been added: software. Current cars, even electric ones, are equipped with operating systems that require licenses, subscriptions, unlocking. Companies sell functions as if they were applications. Even the heated seat may come with a monthly cost. Addiction has changed shape, but it has not disappeared. Ultimately, what is at stake is not just which energy source drives the car. He is the one who controls this movement. The electric car threatens this logic. It gives autonomy. It breaks with the maintenance. Structure. It decentralizes profit. And that's why it was fought. What history clearly shows is that electric vehicles have never been unviable. They were made unviable by a network of interests that needed to maintain the status quo. The sabotage was not accidental. It was strategic, deliberate, and effective. But perhaps the biggest impact was not economic. It was social. We missed the chance to accelerate the energy transition decades earlier. We lost the chance to have less polluted, less noisy, more humane cities. We lost the opportunity to freely choose between sustainable mobility and a system that makes us pay for every kilometer with money and health. And we waste time. Time that the planet may no longer have. Now the question that remains is not whether electric vehicles will return. They're already back. The question is, will the story allow them to be truly accessible this time? Or will it be just another repetition, with new faces, new brands, and the same structure as always? If we want a different future, we must first understand who shaped the past, because only then can we recognize the signs of sabotage, while it is still happening. History does not repeat itself in exactly the same way. It changes its face, scenery, technology, but the patterns remain. And when we look at the electric cars of the present, what we see is not a revolution, but a silent repetition of the same mechanisms of control and exclusion that buried the first electric vehicles more than a century ago. Today, electric cars are back on the streets. They're in the windows, in advertisements, in political speeches. But did they return as a promise of democratization or as a carefully managed luxury product? The promises are big. Less pollution, less noise, more efficiency. But access is still restricted. Prices remain high. Production is still concentrated in the hands of a few companies. And the infrastructure, although better than in 1900, is still far from universal. Why? After so many decades, do electric cars remain unaffordable for most people? Why, even with all the innovation available, do they still behave like exclusive products? The answer is uncomfortable, because it matters. At the beginning of the 20th century, what buried electric cars was the interest of oil companies, automakers, and parts suppliers. Today, the protagonists have changed, but the incentives remain. The economy surrounding mobility still depends on constant consumption, replacement, planned obsolescence, and technical dependence. Look at the current business model of major automakers. An electric car is sold, but its features are often locked by software. Simple functions, such as seat heating or increasing range, are only available upon additional payment. You don't buy a car anymore. You sign a contract. A vehicle becomes a recurring monetization platform. This is repeated even in repairs. In many models, the user cannot change a battery themselves. You need authorization from the manufacturer. You need a certified technician. Sometimes you even need to pay a fee to unlock access to features already installed on the hardware. This logic keeps control in the hands of the industry. And this is no accident. It's a project. Laws also follow this trend. Instead of mandating standardization of batteries, legislation often allows each brand to use proprietary technologies. This makes it difficult to create a strong secondary market. This makes the repair more expensive. This impedes consumer independence. Furthermore, charging stations are often managed by companies that follow closed models. Some require their own apps, specific cards, dynamic rates, and in many cases, there is no standardization of connectors, which creates more barriers to widespread use. Another point is marketing. Automakers promote electric cars as a status symbol, not a solution for everyone. The advertising language reinforces that these vehicles are premium, sophisticated, exclusive. The image created is that of luxury, not accessible mobility. Meanwhile, cheaper and more popular models are produced in limited volumes or not available at all in emerging markets. It is as if there was a veiled effort to keep electric mobility restricted to the economic elite. All of this reflects a historical pattern, restricting access to cleaner and more efficient technology in the name of preserving profits and power structures. It was like that in 1900, and it continues to be like that in 2025. And there is more. The extraction of lithium, cobalt, and other essential materials for electric car batteries also follows a predatory logic. Large corporations control mines in poor countries. Workers are exploited. Territories are devastated. And all this in the name of sustainability that does not question its production chain. Electric mobility, as it is being conducted today, solves part of the environmental problem, but creates new social, economic, and ethical dilemmas. It replaces the burning of oil with dependence on strategic minerals, and the type of centralization changes, but not its existence. That's why we need to look at electric vehicles with more critical eyes. They are not, in themselves, the solution. They can be part of it, but only if they are designed to serve the majority, not to reinforce privilege. As long as they remain expensive, closed, controlled, and dependent on opaque contracts, they will continue to repeat the story of sabotage, even without the gasoline fumes. And this repetition can be seen in data. In the United States, less than 15% of new car sales are electric, and within this number, the vast majority are concentrated in rich states among families with above-average income. In Latin American countries, access is even lower, taxes are high, the available models are scarce, and infrastructure is still a project. In practice, the modern electric car is being promoted as the future, but it is being sold as an exclusive. This gets worse when we analyze the relationship between governments and automakers. Many countries offer public subsidies for giant companies to invest in electric car factories. But these same subsidies are rarely accompanied by demands about final price, affordable maintenance, or widespread availability. It's public money financing private technology, with no guarantee of public benefit. The result of this is a closed cycle. Those who already have access gain more comfort. Those who don't have it continue to pay dearly for fossil fuels, traditional maintenance, and an inefficient system. Even the green car talk is often a smokescreen. Battery production is highly polluting. The electrical energy used to charge vehicles in many places still comes from fossil sources. And the manufacturing of vehicles itself generates considerable emissions. In other words, the electric car is better than the combustion one in many aspects, but it is far from being neutral. And when sold as an elite product, it becomes just a new symbol of distinction, not a tool for transformation. Therefore, the story needs to be told more honestly. Yes, electric cars have potential. Yes, they can change the world. But they won't do that while they're stuck in the same structures that blocked their evolution 100 years ago. The true future of mobility does not just depend on changing engines. It depends on breaking mental and economic models. It depends on the openness of the systems, the democratization of technologies, transparency in contracts, and the recognition that access to mobility is a right, not a luxury. If we don't learn from the past, we will continue to be condemned to repeat the present. The modern electric car shouldn't be a new status icon. It should be a symbol of accessible progress, a step forward in the search for a cleaner, fairer, and freer world. But for this to happen, we need to face the interests that prefer to keep everything exactly as it is, because they won't stop. They've won before, and they know exactly what to do to win again. The story we just went through isn't just about cars. It's not just about energy. It's not just about business. It's about choices. Choices that were made by a few, but that affected the lives of billions. Choices that buried clean, accessible, and sustainable technologies. Choices that transformed mobility into a chain of dependency. For more than a century, we believed that electric cars were expensive because the technology wasn't ready, that the batteries didn't last, that no one wanted. But all of this was just the tip of the iceberg. What was behind it was deeper. A combination of economic control, corporate lobbying, strategic silence, and manipulation of public opinion. We saw how the first electric vehicles appeared in the 19th century. We saw how they dominated big city streets in the early 1900s. We saw how figures like Edison and Ford tried to make them affordable. And we saw how all of this was erased, not by chance, but by intention. Over the decades, this sabotage was repeated. Whenever electric mobility threatened to break the cycle of dependence on fossil fuels and spare parts, it was stopped, silently, efficiently. And the most impressive thing is that this pattern is still alive. Today, electric vehicles are back, but they returned with luxury labels, opaque contracts, and promises packaged for consumption. They returned as closed, limited, controlled products. The speech is green, but the logic is old. Meanwhile, the planet heats up. Air becomes toxic in big cities. Inequality grows. Dependence on finite resources deepens, and millions remain without access to dignified, clean, modern mobility. Not for lack of technology, but due to lack of real interest in changing. The problem was never technical. It has always been political, economic, strategic. And that is precisely why the story needs to be told. Because when we understand how we got here, we can see the signs that the game continues to be rigged. And maybe, just maybe, we can stop it from continuing. Telling this story is an act of resistance. It is refusing the official narrative that taught us to accept delay as natural. It is challenging the logic that only what makes a profit deserves to exist. It's remembering that technology only fulfills its role when it serves everyone, not just those who can pay more. Memory has power, power to expose, power to liberate, and, above all, the power to show that not everything is lost. Electric vehicles still play a decisive role in the future of mobility, but this future will only be different if we learn from the past. The systems need to be opened. Standardize chargers, make repairs affordable, open software codes, democratize access to batteries, ensuring that clean mobility is a right and no longer a symbol of privilege. But this will only happen if there is pressure, if there is a voice, if there is memory. That's why telling this story is not just a historical exercise. It's a summons to question, to demand, to imagine what could have been and what could still be. Perhaps the scariest part of this narrative isn't the destruction of EV1, nor the disappearance of the Edison-Ford project. Neither does the dominance of Standard Oil. Perhaps the scariest thing is realizing that all of this was possible because almost no one objected, because almost nobody knew, because almost no one cared. And now that we know, the question changes. What are we going to do with this information? Are we going to passively watch another cycle of control disguised as innovation? Or will we build another path based on freedom, transparency, and access? That choice, finally, is in our hands. But before that is done, there is one last piece of this story that needs to be revealed. A forgotten piece, silenced, intentionally removed from the books. When you look at an electric car, you're not just seeing a vehicle. You see a battlefield, and now you know who's fighting and why.